how are we doing? It's a kind of lovely-ish Sunday here for me. A lot's happened over the past few months, hasn't it? Just lovely-ish Sunday here for me. There we go. I was just checking that we're live, and we definitely am. I definitely am. So yeah, hi. How are we doing? Merry Sunday, happy Sunday. I think that might be how to talk about it. But yeah, we're living in the strangest timeline, aren't we? Very much the strangest timeline. 2020 is one hell of a year. One hell of a year. It's nice to know that we're living through history still. This is not the end of history, at least. But I thought I'd make a little video, a little Sunday evening video, just to see, just to get, just to voice my opinion on something that's happened back in my hometown of, well, my home city. But yes, you may not be able to tell because I don't have a full-on West Country accent, but I'm from just outside of Bristol. I live in a small town called Portishead. But like anybody that kind of lives in that region, Bristol very much dominates the area. It's the biggest city. It's, if you want to go out or want to do any decent shopping, you need to go to Bristol. That's kind of the way it is. And Bristol is a very old city. It's a port city, and thus, because of that, has a lot of connections to the transatlantic slave trade. Many of the goods that were purchased from the New World after slaves were sold here in Bristol. We're going to go through that a little bit later. But yeah, it's just I wanted to chip in my 2 cents. Now, I'm not living in Bristol currently anymore. I'm currently living in Liverpool. I moved up to Liverpool, another port city, another city where the goods of the empire were sold. So very much linked again to the transatlantic slave trade. But Bristol is a city, and we're going to go through this later, which has a strong link, you might say, to that period of time. So yeah, of course, I'm not sure if anyone doesn't know, but a few weeks ago now, well, it would have been nearly 2 weeks ago, another one of many black American man, singular this time, but of course many have died, was murdered essentially by police. George Floyd, I think everyone knows his name. And there was outcry from the black community, from people campaigning and have been campaigning against the police doing this type of thing. And I think combined with half of the world being affected by COVID-19 and how visual it was, I think seeing the man kneeling on his neck was very, very full on, I suppose. Though we've seen clips of black men being shot and black men being chokeholded. This is the second time, at least I know, where I've seen a black man saying that they couldn't believe to the police and then dying moments later. So outrage ensued, and of course it did, rightfully so. But it spread quite a lot this time across the world. There are people across America. I think, we've seen that 50 states, there have been protests held in 50 states, but also protests have spread across the world. We've seen some in Paris, we've seen some in London, and we saw some in Bristol. Today in my hometown, I had some friends that were there. Largely a peaceful protest from what I've gathered from them, but something quite incredible happened, or something that I think is quite incredible. So this statue of Edward Colston, which sits very much in the centre of the town centre. It's just outside the law courts, or very, very close. I had to do my jury service last year, and so I saw it every day as you're walking in. This area here, it's got two main roads either side, essentially, of this statue, and the statue's in the middle. So again, it's a very prominent part of a very busy area of Bristol. It's very visible. This isn't like a statue of somebody who, which is like in a park, which is also a public space, of course, but this is very much in the centre of Bristol. It's very much, seemingly presenting one of the founding fathers of Bristol. And look what happened to him today, the poor fella. Well, maybe not. We're going to discuss a little bit later about who Edward Colston was and why I actually think this is quite amazing what's happened and why it's very important. So yeah, Edward Colston, this is what happened. What's that again? There you go. So it was dragged down. Just been viewed 1.8 million times. Another one here, another clip from... Look at that. Well and truly torn down off his perch. This is what I'm like. Was it glued on? Was it just kind of there? I mean, well, I suppose we'll find out. But they tore it down. They didn't just tear it down. There's this very powerful image here of someone kneeling on the neck of the man, of Edward Colston. And then this is what they did with it eventually, and I think this is equally amazing. So they rolled it from, one of the centres. It's just called the centre. At least that's what the bus stop is when you have to get off there. They rolled it down to the river. This is actually really not that far away. This is maybe 400 metres, 500 metres away to the River Avon. And this is what they did to him there. Sorry. Lots of cheering. But as you see, they got it off the stone base. So again, that would have been very, very heavy. I saw some good footage of them literally rolling it, like 4 guys, over and over and over. So like, just if anyone's never been to Bristol, if you imagine this building here, it's like a buffet place. There's like a walkway here. You go down there and then you get to the centre. It's really not that far away from where this statue is. But yeah, they pushed it in. Dragged it down, pushed it in. Broad daylight as well. Incredible. We'll stick with this one up here at the moment. But yeah, it's quite an amazing image, really. I think. There has been much debate around the statue. you may be able to tell I've got a few tabs open. We're going to go through why I think this is important and shouldn't be condemned, because of course the press reaction, and some on Twitter, I'm sure you can find some. Yeah, here we go. So here's someone comparing it to ISIS in Syria. There's I think I saw a reply somewhere else. Yeah, so here's someone. The method is important, So yes, okay, maybe petition or something. Maybe, I don't know, complain about the statue, but tearing it down, that's violence. That's vandalism. Vandalism there. It's part of the press release. Priti Patel basically just condemns the vandalism. Later, we'll listen to her in a moment. Of course, the Home Secretary. However, I think most of the response, at least on Twitter, has been pretty good. So there's some good stuff. I don't understand why no one is asking why we even have statues of slave traders, and people, are raising who he was. I've seen some people raising, how many people Edward Colston transported across the Atlantic. Because Edward Colston, this wasn't somebody who, just benefited. This isn't someone just buying the goods and, say, trading them. So say cotton merchants, people like that. Edward Colston was someone who was actively involved in the purchasing of slaves in West Africa, around that coast, transporting them across the Atlantic, selling them in America, purchasing other goods, and then transporting those goods back to Bristol, where they would be sold and where he made lots and lots of money. It's all a matter of public record. Most people in Bristol, at least people that know history, know this. Interestingly, if you look on his Wikipedia, Edward Colston was an English slave trader, merchant, and philanthropist. Oh, look at that. Of course, many people today say that philanthropy is the it's how business owners share their wealth and upon themselves, don't they, of all the bad things they've done. And look, they've got some stuff on his career. His altruism. Let me guess, was he a liberal of the time? Supported schools, almshouses, hospitals and churches, and many of the charitable foundations survive today. Yes. Colston's name is plastered across Bristol. It's not just on this statue, which was torn down today. I think it is being removed. I think they have called the Colston Hall now just the concert hall, but Colston's name was on that, and that was basically Bristol's premier location for kind of music. I once saw Motorhead there at the Colston Hall, but they have all sorts of shows. They do like a regional choir thing at the Colston Hall every year, and I performed at that back when I was a wee lad. But they've got Colston Tower, which is I believe like a place with offices and businesses in, which it looms over the kind of centre of Bristol. There it is, Colston Tower. I mean, it's not tall by American standards or even say Manchester standards, but it's tall by Bristol standards. But also, like, his name is on streets, on avenues. Colston's Girls' School is still a very popular private school in the town, and it's plastered all over primary schools, all that kind of stuff. People know who Colston is if they're from Bristol. So yeah, here we go. In 2017, charity that runs the Colston Hall announced it will drop the name. But again, that took a long time. 2017, it's only a couple of years ago. And also, in regards to the statue specifically, a few Hiya, Jacob. I'll read out your comments in a second. I just want to finish my point. They did have, they did polls in 2014, the Bristol Post. 56% said it should stay. 44% said it should go. People have called about having a plaque or all that kind of stuff. So a couple of years ago, the council, which of course is responsible for this. This is not a private statue. This is in the centre of town, public statue. Said that they would put a second plaque on it, adding to the public knowledge about Colston, his involvement in the slave trade. But of course, they were gonna talk about his philanthropy. It'd be interesting. And of course, it's been reworded, and that the initial one was their initial plan had to be changed because it wasn't good enough. But yeah, so Jacob O.C. with some comments here. Now I have a space for Ian Holloway statue in Bristol. I can see why some people are angry, because it's a place of history. People think tearing it down is showing guilt, but we deserve a better statue. No idea of who it should be. Obviously not Ian Holloway. Yeah, definitely. I think this is very positive action. It shows angry black people who think we're inherently racist, that we're actually not fucking racist, and that we love all humans. Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that's obvious to see from these clips. This is a protest protesting police brutality. This is a Black Lives Matter protest, but there are lots of mixed. This is a mix of white and black and brown faces here, and here as well. Look, this is the crew of people checked in. It's a very diverse crew, and of course, I think that's something that's actually been really, really good about the protests a lot, is that they are, this is a diverse movement. People that support Black Lives. It's a very young movement. I think that's probably the actual unifying factor, but also that may just be because of the current situation. Older folks might not fancy a trip out. But yeah, chuck in your 2 cents in the comments if you're one of the 4 people watching. Chuck in your 2 cents. Again, this is just something just to get my comments out there, but if people have something to say, they should say it. But anyway, not everyone was happy. In fact, we'll watch pretty after we've read. From the fountain of most knowledge, the Daily Mail Online. Their headlines, which are always too long, by the way. Daily Mail headlines are like 5 to 6 lines long. And it's pretty mad, really, Daily Mail. Like, their editors, they really need to get onto it anyway. So, Black Lives Matter protests tear down Bristol statue of 17th century slave trader and philanthropist. Look at that, they had to get that in there. Edward Colston. Cover it red paint and throw it in the dock. While huge crowds descend on in London, where Churchill's statue is defaced. There you go. Here's them rolling it. And I wouldn't say they covered it in red paint, but they did something. But yeah, there's them transporting it down the centre and into the dock. Ironically, we're going to talk about this bridge later, because this is one of the only few slave trade memorials in Bristol. This bridge here. But there you go. And there's him falling in. Glug, 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 bye-bye. And of course, there were similar protests in London, which, because the Met can't help themselves, of course, turn nasty. But we'll talk a bit more about that in a second, shall we? But yeah, we're focusing on Colston right now. But yeah, incredible scenes. So of course the fountain of all balanced. The paper of the right, the Mail, condemned it. But let's see what the Home Secretary had to say. She is, of course, a person of colour.
Well, I think that is utterly disgraceful, and that speaks to the acts of disorder, public disorder, that actually have now become a distraction from the cause in which people are actually protesting about and trying to empathise and sympathise with. That is completely an unacceptable act, and that speaks to the vandalism, again, as we saw yesterday in London, but sheer vandalism and disorder
again.
Completely
disorder
is unacceptable. Again. And it's right, actually, the police follow up on that and make sure that justice is undertaken with those individuals that are responsible for such disorderly and lawless behaviour.
Disorder. Got to get your 3Ds in there, rule of three. So yeah, so the police, of course, have come out and said that they're investigating, they're looking at the news footage, are there any criminals in there? Well, good luck to them, I suppose, is what I say. Because fortunately, people had their face coverings on. Always good. And again, in a lot of these, it's kind of hard to make out any face. But yeah, so you have to get that in there. Nice support for law and order there from the Tories, of course. But of course, she has to say this. But it's this interesting notion that this is going to make people who are sympathetic to these protests, they're going to go, oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe Black Lives Matter isn't for me. Because they tore down Edward Colston. Which is interesting. There is a criminal in that footage. Well, again, we'll see what comes of it, won't we? I'm sure if you get 500 anybodies, there's going to be someone that's committed a criminal act, isn't there? Anyway, back to the statue being torn down. I think, yeah, there's been some paint thrown at the Churchill one as well, hasn't there, I think, in London. See if the Mail will always, yeah, here we go. Oh, was a racist, there you go, and something's been taped on it. Again, you know, I'm okay with that. He has said some horrible things about Indians. Churchill did. Look them up. It's not great. But anyhow, disorder. Disorder and, you know, splitting folks up, you know, making people sympathetic to the cause, maybe turn off. Well, I suppose what I would say with that is there's always going to be people that disagree with any form of direct action, you know. There was that wonderful clip of Ash Sarkar, who you may love or hate, taking on that American guest on the Jeremy Vine program, you know, where the American guest was saying, you know, oh, they need to find more constructive ways of showing their discontent, and, you know, and Ash Sarkar raised the, well, you said that Colin Kaepernick shouldn't be kneeling, you know, all those years ago. You know, people are always going to be anti any form of direct action. They always have been, you know. There's a great comic, I've got it saved on my computer here, let me see if I can get it up, which is from the 60s, which, you know, I think shows that the sentiment's always been there, you know. Be embedded into my downloads somewhere, hang on a moment. But it's one of those ones where, yeah, sure, some people will probably be a little bit turned off, but at the same time, it's quite incredible that people are this aware and that it's happened. So here we go. Someone's drawn on it a lot, so that's an older comic. I couldn't find one without the drawings, but I plan to leave another non-violent march tomorrow, and of course it's MLK and the white journalist going, "Oh, I'm scared. Look, he's scared. Look, there's a literal, you know, dead or knocked out man here, another foot here, and then of course destruction." So there's always going to be people that see any form of direct action, any form of protest as divisive. But it's amazing that this many people were out in Bristol today, I think. You know, look at this crowd. This is a huge crowd of people. And they've raised an important issue, especially in regards to Bristol, because we're going to talk a bit about Bristol, a little bit about Edward Colston. There's the bridge that it was chucked in by, so they chucked him in right there. Bristol kind of doesn't have any major memorial, at least in my opinion, to the slave trade. They have a couple of plaques, is essentially it, and then that bridge, which we'll go through in a minute. They literally have this one here, which is a plaque in 1997, in memory to the countless African men, women and children whose enslavement and exploitation brought so much prosperity to Bristol through the African slave trade, you know, and then unveiled during 1997 by a member of the European Parliament. I mean, it's a good message, definitely. And then there's this one here, which kind of capital of the Atlantic slave trade, commemorates the 12 million who were enslaved and the 6 million who died. But yes, there really isn't a major memorial to the slave trade in Bristol. This is the only one, that's Perros Bridge, which we will quickly search for. But this is it. It's a bridge, again in the centre of Bristol. It's quite functional. Unfortunately nowadays it's plagued by those love locks, you know, where they throw away the keys, you know. So I did see somebody genuinely complain about throwing it in the river. It's not littering, which I suppose it is, but at the same time, yeah, get angry about other forms of littering, please, not direct action. But Perros Bridge is essentially, supposedly, you know, it's counterweights. It's the way it's designed is meant to raise awareness to the slave trade in Bristol. It's named after a slave that lived in Bristol, I believe, Pero. Let's see, hang on. The bridge was designed by Irish artists in conjunction with engineers who opened it in 1999. The name of the bridge is often condemned. The decision is just the politics. The council can call it what they want, but Perros Bridge sounds a bit political. Hundreds of people now attach padlocks. Yeah, so it's literally just named after a slave, and people don't know that, you know. But it's supposedly this gesture, part of Bristol learning its past, you know, acknowledging it, and that's it. That's all it is. There isn't a major memorial to slavery in Bristol, at least not that I know of. If you know of one, please send me. But nothing that is as in the middle of the centre and there as Colstans Statue is. But yeah, I mean, Bristol, again, I thought this is quite a nice article here. 7 places in Bristol you didn't know a link to slavery. I often say quite hyperbolically that all of Clifton is built on slave money, and though I'm sure there may be some trades there that isn't, but a lot of the kind of amazing touristy areas of Bristol depend on or are built on the back of the slave trade. So here we go, you've got Queen's Square here, which is kind of it's kind of to the side of the centre, and it's a nice little park and there's some cafes and stuff. But yeah, it's nice, and there you go. It was home to wealthy merchants and traders. There you go, like Henry Bright. There you go. Statue, the bridge. So here we go, another house. Let me guess who lived in here. So the Pinney family furnished there. John Pinney. Oh, it is Pero Jones's master. There you go. So the bridge that this is named after, that slave lived in this house here. But this is the one, Corn Street, the Exchange Market. It's attached. It's kind of attached to quite to St Nick's Market, which is kind of a cool and trendy market. But like the at the front is this giant building, the kind of the Corn Exchange, which is where some traders are in. And this was somewhere that where the products of the empire would be sold, essentially. Yeah. So as we say here, major hub for trading. Merchants would come here to discuss trading options. They would sell luxury goods. They would think about the next expeditions. And then, of course, you've got the spoons opposite it, which is what a world we live in, where a place that would be a site of high luxury of business is now Wetherspoons. But again, that's what I mean by when I say Bristol is a city which has slavery kind of embedded to its core. And it's something that not many people remember, I don't think, or at least not many people think about it in the way that I think we should. Because a lot of people are still rather ignorant about it, and again, the old Vic, of course, that was built on slave money. But so much money was pumped into Bristol because of the slave trade. And of course, whereas we think about the slave trade, I think from an American perspective, because of course we like to think about it from the slave's perspective, roots, 12 years a slave, that's some media, but that kind of thing. We don't think about how it enabled the progress of cities like Bristol, and how it inspired and resulted in the Industrial Revolution, which of course is why Britain could develop an empire as quickly as it could, or at least as large as it did, is why Britain is so more advanced than much of the world. Why Britain, despite, today, 60, 70 people living here, is still one of the largest economies in the world. And it's based on, especially in cities like Bristol, it's based on the purchase and the sale of African slaves. So this is something from the BBC that I was going through earlier, just before this. Gainers and losers, yeah, and there you go. So wealthy Bristolians. A few years ago, there was a website which where you could search your family name and then see who owned slaves, which was linked to when the British state reimbursed slave owners. So when slavery was ended in the UK in the 1830s, the only way that they could do it was to reimburse people who had owned slaves. I'm see if we can find it now. Actually, so Bristol slave trade. What should you Google? Database. See if we can find it. National Archives, maybe. But if we can't find it, that's okay. I'll see if I can find it and link it down below whilst I'm kind of post-processing this. But we really don't think about its connection to why Bristol is, one, so beautiful. There are some areas of Bristol which are completely stunning, and why Bristol, is such a tourist hub. Loads of tourists, when they visit the UK, come to Bristol because it's so pretty. We've got the suspension bridge and all the amazing early 19th century architecture. But all of this is based on prosperity that was brought to the city by slaves, and we don't even have a memorial. And people complain when people say, maybe our concert hall shouldn't have a slave trader's name on it. Maybe there shouldn't be statues of slave traders in the centre of town. Maybe our maybe slave owners, our prestigious private schools shouldn't be named after this person. And of course, here we go, this might be it. God damn it. Again, if I find it, I'll share it. Oh no, yeah, this is it. Legacies of British slave ownership. So we'll go through this in a moment. But it's something that needs to be remembered. And though this may make some people react poorly, pearl clutching on the such, I think fundamentally this is amazing that there are people who are aware enough to do this, and then symbolic enough to dump it in the sea, which is where, of course, the deceased, the people that didn't make it to the New World, would be thrown. And I think there's nothing almost more visual, is there, than a statue being pulled down. And people really need to look into Bristol's connection to the slave trade. I remember when I was young, and what's now the M Shed, which has some reference to slave traders, but not as much as the old museum that what used to be on that site did. They had a big image. Let's see if you can find it. M Shed Museum. See what it was called. But there used to be a whole section on the slave trade there, and there isn't now. At least as far as I can remember. You never know, it might have changed. I haven't been there for a while. But moments like this highlight history and make us think about history and how we remember history. I think thankfully a lot of the people who have not been happy about it haven't, oh, you're destroying history, because this is history right now. The tearing down of this statue, and I'm sure they'll fish it out of the dock. I'm sure the authorities will, because actually now, smashed up, torn down, it's probably a historical artifact and should be moved, maybe to the M Shed or to Bristol Museum, and should be an exhibit there. Is what I would say. These statues in public places that honour the city do show implicit support. They do. At least I think they do. And though, of course, we should have, we should understand that people in the past lived within a context, we shouldn't not forget the context or the things that were bad, and say that, have philanthropists as his third thing that we remember him by, because he gave some money to some schools, some posh schools, and gave away some of his money that was acquired on the sale of black lives. It's really quite something, I feel. And it's funny that this is disorder, according to Priti Patel. However, what we saw in London yesterday, where police were charging horses in on protesters, what we've seen in some of these images here in the Mail, of police arresting protesters, and look, here we go, we've got one picture here, but of course these are all taken behind the police line, all these photographs. So of course they have to show the police in a good light, otherwise you don't get this access. You'd be on this side. But yeah, truncheons at the ready, riot gear at the ready. There isn't a police officer who doesn't have the gear. But just a month ago we were told that doctors and nurses in the NHS couldn't have the correct the correct PPE. But yeah, maybe I'll do another more in-depth stream in a couple of days about Bristol's legacy with the slave trade. But here it is, Legacies of British Slave Ownership, and you can search the database for your individuals. So here we go, let's type Manners in, because Manners is my, here we go, we've just got one, Alex Manners. had 8 enslaved. Look at this. But yeah, and so you can see, using this, so 8 slaves was worth £221, 11 shillings and 7 pence. When, yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? But yeah, commercial firms. But it's got all sorts here about the ending of slavery. But it's a proud moment, in my opinion. This isn't people destroying history. This isn't people forgetting history. This is people remembering history and knowing about it, and should prompt us to think, why does that statue sit where it does? To think, why do we get upset that a slave owner's statue's been torn down? Why are people attached to this? Why are people attached to the Colston Hall? Why isn't there a memorial to slavery in Bristol, or at least a big one? Yeah, I think we'll leave you on that. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad we got some comments. That's good, even if we don't have to agree, I suppose. I think shouting, but it's, again, with lockdown, with my nice gear, which I do own, I'd quite like to try this again. So yeah, I may do a stream in a couple of days just on the slave trade in Bristol and how closely they were linked. That would give me something nice to aim towards. But yeah, an incredible moment. Just my 40 minutes of my opinion there. Jesus Christ. Who am I? Someone that likes the sound of their own voice a bit too much there. So yeah, thank you very much. Pop your comments down there, I suppose. Now I'll attach some links now. Thank you very much. All 4 of you that watch this. Yeah, cheers.